Good evening, everybody, and welcome to yet another Ask Professor Paranormal. Sorry we had a little shift in the schedule, but tonight will be another session, and then I'll be back on next Sunday night and back to the every other week as well. I see some names I recognize, some people I recognize. Good to see you all here. That's great. And I think everybody who's here has been here before, so I don't have to do my normal kind of intro, maybe later on when there are more people with us. So as you know, just ask me questions, going to bring up a topic, and that's perfect. Okay. Oh, there is a video latency. I see that. Yeah. Well, at least it's not, hopefully it's not the audio latency this time around. I'm not quite sure what is, hopefully it's not my computer. I don't think so. Anyway, as long as everybody can hear me, all right. Oh, so Rhonda, you're a first-time viewer. Okay. Thank you, Jimmy, for pointing that out. Rhonda, just so you know, I do this more or less every other week, and it's for folks to actually ask questions or bring up topics having to do with the paranormal, with psychic phenomena, which of course covers the paranormal, and parapsychology work, research, investigation. All of that stuff is fair game here. As most of these folks know, I don't really talk about UFOs or cryptids or any of that other stuff because that's not within the field too much, other than, some things I might have some mild interest in. All right. And Melody, good to see you here as well. Okay, so I will start with a question that came across. Somebody sent me via email a couple of weeks ago after the last session. It's from Kelly, who I don't see is here yet, but she can obviously watch us on the recording. And she was asking about electronic voice phenomena. And so she had very specific questions about that, having to do with the equipment one needs and where to buy it and all that stuff. So I thought I'd start out by talking a little bit about that topic, since it's a lot simpler than the Ghost Hunter TV shows and the Ghost Hunter groups make it out to be. Electronic voice phenomena, by definition, and I think many of you already know this, is a voice that is created in the device, electronically created in the device. It is not an acoustical sound that is picked up by a microphone. In fact, microphones are completely unnecessary for EVP. EVP is different than voice phenomena, where perhaps an apparition, a ghost, makes a sound, says something that everybody can hear. That can be recorded on multiple recorders. One of the differences with EVP is if you have two recorders running, only one of them might pick it up because, again, it's created in the device. How is it created? Well, if any consciousness, living or dead, creates an effect on the physical world, that's called psychokinesis. That's mind over matter. So whether or not the effect is on the recording device, allowing it to record something that isn't acoustical, or perhaps just on the memory, or if you're using an antiquated cassette recorder or reel-to-reel, we know that there have been EVPs captured on just blank tape without even a recording device. So it's recorded into that stuff within the device itself, which means that, again, since the beginning, since folks have been doing it with Jorgensen and Konstantin Raudevi are a couple of the pioneers in this area. There are others today. Annabelle Cardozo is one of who's doing this out of Italy today. From a scientific perspective, we know that it's not necessary for anything to pick up sound. So when somebody asks me about the best equipment, it really is any equipment any recording device you can use, which is not going to be affected by other influences. And what I mean by that is back in the 1980s, we had a graduate parapsychology program at JF California for a number of years. And when I was on faculty after I graduated from the university with my master's, I would take calls from people because that was my job. My job was as kind of interface with the public in many respects and also with the media. That's when I wasn't teaching. And I would get calls from people saying that they were using their, back then there were no digital recorders, just, reel to reel perhaps. Most of the people were using cassette recorders, which you could buy almost anywhere. And they were saying they would listen to the tape that they just recorded, and there's a voice there. And they didn't know where the voice came from. And people would send us some of these tapes. And 99 out of 100 times, not that we actually got 100, in fact, I don't recall that we had any that were unexplainable. We either got very unclear things, which would have been other sounds that were recorded, or we got very clear voices, which from the context were either CB radio signals or, I guess, dead truckers who are using that kind of lingo. Cassette recorders could pick up, many cassette recorders, not all of them, could pick up radio signals. And they were often prone to picking up CB radio, which was a very common thing for people to use on the road. And that was a problem. Another problem with cassette recorders was picking up the sound of its own motor. Because if you listen to a cassette recorder, if anybody still has one, put your ear to it, you'll hear sound coming from the actual spooling of the tape and possibly even the motor itself. And sometimes the motor that was driving that spooling and the recording would be a little bit louder than you'd want. And if you have a microphone, or of course it has a mic input, it's going to possibly pick up its own sound. And sometimes that was a grinding sound. Sometimes it sounded like groans. Sometimes like other sounds, and sort of sounded like voices sometimes if you listen to it very carefully and thought that it might be voices. So those were not really good devices. Most digital recorders today are not subject to any sort of outside or external issues. So that's not really a problem for that. But if you have any audio recorder at all, and we've got a couple here. So here's a typical, this is actually a digital recorder that I bought. I have got a Philips digital recorder also. It's got a mic input, actually. Here's another. Here's my Philips recorder, voice recorder that I've got. All right, I didn't buy them for EVP, by the way. I bought them for recording interviews in cases, as it happens. All right, so the reason this little plug that I've got here, which goes into any of these recorders, is plugged now into the microphone input, which means that if I'm recording, it's not going to pick up any sound at all from the outside. So if I was going to try to do any EVP, I would use a recorder with this plug in there. And that way, when I'm listening back, or if you're listening back to the recording, you're going to hear possibly static or a hiss, but you're not going to hear anything unless something has affected the recorder itself in that way. The one downside for that is you don't hear, if somebody were to ask questions, there's not any context. So what you need to do is actually, if you're going to ask questions, you need to actually take note of the time that you started. Make sure your time is set, the clock is set properly. Note of that when you start the recorder. And anytime you write down a question or ask a question, you write it down, put a timestamp on it. So you can connect that to any potential EVP. If you can't find a little plug like this is just simply a little audio plug. What you can do is buy yourself a real cheap, or you probably have these somewhere in your house, a cheap set of earphones, the kind that we used to use before wireless, before AirPods and things. They're the really cheap ones. They cost a couple. You can still buy them at places like the dollar store very easily for $1. And plug it in to the mic input, not the headphone input, headphone plug, but plug it into the mic, and then literally cut the cord so that it's not any longer connected to the actual earbuds itself. At that point, it can't record anything. And the reason you clip the cord is because earbuds can act like microphones. In fact, I used to do that when I didn't have a mic for years ago for my cassette recorder. I would actually use the earbuds themselves as a microphone for that. All right, so Rhonda is asking, would a Faraday bag be beneficial? Not if you're recording sound. I mean, if you don't plug the mic in, it can still pick up sound through a Faraday bag. So that's not going to be beneficial. And we don't know whether, PK, psychokinesis, mind over matter, doesn't seem to matter whether it's coming from outside a Faraday bag or not. So I haven't heard of anything beneficial in that circumstance here. And Jonathan, I'll get to your question here in a second. So when it comes down to EVP, pretty much any good recorder, I mean, it wouldn't really skimp, but any good recorder is good. Analysis, there is Audacity software if you want to do that analysis. Just remember to plug the mic. And the other thing you could do is just have two recorders, so that if you get a voice on one but not on the other as you're recording next side by side, that at least is an indication that something's happening inside the device itself. All right, but there's some very simple audio analysis type software like Audacity that one can use. And of course, a recorder, anywhere you can buy it, well, Amazon. Easy way to get that. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, video is still wonky. We don't know what's going on with that at this point, why there's a latency. All right, my thoughts on disembodied voice. Is it acoustical, or is it something you heard in your head? There is nothing about an apparition that seems to be able to create a physical sound, other than perhaps rapping on a wall using PK. In other words, when I'm creating sound right now, I've got air going through my vocal cords, and that is disturbing the air. It's causing vibrations. That doesn't seem to be the case with any apparitional or ghostly phenomena at all. We pick it up mentally, and we perceive it as a sound, as a voice. We perceive it as a disembodied voice. It's not much different than when one person sees an apparition but nobody else does, because that one person is sensitive to or open to receiving the signal from that entity, and it gets put into your perceptions in that way. All right, so disembodied voices. I was with a medium friend of mine, my friend Ankasha, at the Moss Beach Distillery restaurant years ago, and we had a communication session with the ghost there. Then we sat down for lunch. We went downstairs below, and I started kind of interviewing her about her experience connecting with the ghost. And I very clearly heard off to my left-hand side, we were 3 feet from the patio glass wall, and the glass doors were, and it was a weekday, and there was literally nobody out in the patio. There was nobody around in the lower part of the restaurant at all. And I heard, "Hi, Lloyd," in a nice kind of lilting female voice. And Ankasha looked up and said, "She said something to you, didn't she?" And I said, "Do you know what she said?" And she said, "No, I just kind of heard an echo of a voice." And we played back I had two recorders going. Actually, it was a DAT recorder and an analog recorder, and neither one of them had anything, no voice. So it wasn't an acoustical sound. Okay. Let's see here. So John is saying, wondering if you have any evidence either way as to whether some spirits that are linked to a specific location still see that location as it looked during that time versus how it looks now. None at all. None of the medium communications with apparitions that are in a place. I can say that there are some cases I had with witnesses and a couple times psychics who say that the ghost, the spirit, is not happy with the renovations that were done. So clearly they know what it looks like now. So I haven't heard of any situation where the ghost is not only has stuck themselves not only in the location but also in time like that. Melody, ever investigated the Mendocino Hotel? No, I've been there. Never stayed at the Mendocino Hotel. I love Mendocino. Just really, it's a great town. But I've talked to a few people over the years about what's gone on there, but it's been quite some time. Love to get up there again at some point, just because it's such a great place there. Okay, Patrick, you read The Poltergeist by William G. Rowe last week. Yeah, that is a great book. It's kind of the seminal work on recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, our model of the poltergeist, and very cool. Picked up a signed copy as well. That's great. All right, let's see. When was the first time you wanted a field investigation? All right, so my very first actual field investigation, Paul, was the fall of 1979. It was, if I recall, it was late October. I'd have to look at the exact date. And it was a couple weeks into, probably a 3 or 4 weeks into my first semester, my first quarter in graduate school in parapsychology here in Northern California. Um, and myself and Tom Malone, another student, were sent on a case that had come into the university in the town of Petaluma. And this was a really interesting case, which started out with the woman. It was a woman and her 16-year-old daughter living in the house. The daughter had a twin brother who we found out when we started doing the interviewing at the location. He was in juvenile hall because he was a bit of a delinquent. And then there were two older sisters who were, one was, I think, had just finished college. The other one had been out of college for a little bit as well. And we heard about kind of phenomena that have been going on, physical phenomena on and off for years. And on occasion, sighting of a man in black armor. It's like a black knight, which was pretty interesting. And as it turned out, it was a poltergeist case. It was not an apparition case. It was not a haunting. And it was not. So when we look at poltergeist, we're looking at mainly mind over matter type activity coming from a living person. It was not the 16-year-old girl. It was the mother. And there were some sound psychological reasons why this all happened. So it was an interesting mystery. We went up there the first time, and then the second time I brought two other fellow students came up with us as well. So we were able to kind of resolve the situation, figure out what was going on, and help it along. The Black Knight was a representation from her unconscious. It had to do, the reason the armor and all of that had to do her son and the things he used to play with, loved to play with as a kid. She wanted to blame all the son's behavior on this supposed entity, but instead she created an image for herself, and which was actually perceived by the younger daughter, the 16-year-old, a couple times. And supposedly, although they were a little fuzzy on this, the two older daughters, it was projected, I guess you could say, from the mother's unconscious. The Black Knight is kind of like the shadow figure, is kind of an archetype in psychology. And it's actually why Darth Vader looks like he looks in that. So it's pretty interesting case. It's written up, I wrote it up for Fate magazine years ago. I also wrote it up for my book, A Paranormal Casebook. All right, what are my thoughts on the Estes method versus regular spirit box session? Well, first of all, I don't put a lot of stock in a spirit box at all. That's one thing. And I don't think anybody really in the field does, for a couple of reasons. First of all, you need to know how the spirit box is actually stopping, what it's coming up with. If it's radio signals and it's randomly scanning and stopping on a random points, the major question is this truly random? You know, when we work with doing psychokinesis research in the laboratory, we use random number or random event generators. And those things don't stay random all the time. I mean, usually an algorithm, which is a pseudo-random number generator in a computer, will be fine. But if you use a device that is working off of any number of processes, you got to make sure it stays random. So you have to do randomness checks. And I've yet to hear any of that even the device, once it's built, does anybody check to see if it's truly random? So that's one piece that's important. The second thing is, we know from that research in the laboratory that the mind of the living can affect devices, random number generators, or random systems. So how do you know that what you're picking up and interpreting, because it's still interpretational, how do you know that that's not coming from you and your expectations? And this is a big problem with any spirit communication, even EVP. That's a slight possibility as well. The Estes method, which uses the Ganzfeld kind of lowered sensory deprivation function to allow people to kind of focus on that, see if they pick it up as well. It's fine. I think it's a definite control. It's definitely an advantage over just standard using a spirit box. But you also need to be really clear in any of this stuff that what you think you hear or what you hear actually does relate to a question or statement that's made or gives information. Because unfortunately, just hearing yes or hearing or hearing something that sounds like a human voice with no actual content or information. Too many people relate back to a question, and it may not have anything to do with the question, or it may not have anything to do with anything at all. Plus, I know of several examples where the EVP or what happens with the spirit box seems to relate to the history, but not necessarily a spirit, because place memory or residual hauntings, probably through us living folks, seem to also affect these devices as well and can get recorded. But the biggest issue for me for the spirit box thing is you need to have controls to know that that device is working the way it's claimed to work. That's the biggest piece that has to happen there. But I think, again, if the person listening to the box is not getting any other external stuff, that's fine, but it's still going to be interpretational. You know, one of the things that needs to be done with EVP in general, and there have been studies more recently about this, is that if you think you get an EVP, you can write down what it says, you think it says, but you should never share that with anyone. You need to let a lot of other people listen to that EVP and write down what they think they hear and see how that compares to what you thought you heard. Because there have been studies that show that people generally don't get the same thing until they're told what the person thinks it says. So it really depends on that piece of it. Okay, and the biggest issue about using any equipment in any location is, how do you know the spirit's present? So human beings, we're the defining factor on apparitions, hauntings, all that stuff. In fact, if you have a location and you don't have any witnesses, especially in recent time, you got no firsthand witnesses. I'm not talking about folklore. I'm not talking about something that happened 20 years ago. If you don't have no firsthand witnesses, how do you know the place has an apparition, has a ghost there to begin with, or is even haunted? How do you know? Because it's the human experience that indicates that something's happening there. So without that, you got nothing. Okay, an ovilus depends on the type of device. The ovilus devices I've heard, the robotic ones are just such a pain in the butt. I mean, the ones that actually give you the word or the phoneme or whatever in a display, that's fine. But if it's just that robotic sound, I've heard a bunch of those people recorded the ovilus and played it back. You can interpret it almost any way. It's as bad as an EVP. I know that there are other devices that actually have recorded phonemes, so like parts of a word or even words in their data bank, and they randomly select those words. Again, random. We have to kind of look at that as well. Okay, and yeah, so we're not quite sure what the video, so I apologize for the video. I have no idea what's going on with this at all. I was just on Skype with my producer beforehand, and weren't seeing this lag time at all. So it may be something to do with, well, who knows what it has to do with at this point. But at least you can all hear me. All right. Anybody else? Any other topics or questions we can go forward with from here? And I'll mention, if anybody's here in the San Francisco Bay Area, I will be speaking locally. Looks like I'll be speaking on the evening of the 27th of October at the USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum. They have their Night of Spirits. And then I'll also be speaking at a community center in San Ramon here in the East Bay on October 14th in the morning, late morning, as it happens. So you can always email me through get to me through just simply this email. So just ask profparanormal@gmail.com, or even just profparanormal@gmail.com. I think a lot of people have that email as well. Okay. Ghost R, you find the investigators' loved ones like to try and interact with us versus spirits, the locations in many cases. What's really interesting is that I worked for many years with a psychic medium by the name of Annette Martin. who was one of the best I've ever worked with. I mean, I've worked with a number of really great psychics and mediums over the years, but Annette was kind of a special person for a lot of reasons. And we would go to places, and before we would walk into somebody's house, for example, she'd stand outside and just be quiet for a bit with her eyes closed, and then she'd out loud for myself and the other investigators say, "I'm just telling anybody in the neighborhood who kind of senses that I've tuned into spirits right now to not come in the house while we're there." And she'll actually even say out loud, "Okay, everybody who's in the neighborhood who thinks you want to be communicating with somebody, stay outside. I'll talk to you after we come outside." Because we want to separate what might be in the area versus what's in the location itself. So that's important here. Let's see. All right. When will the Rhine Institute be discussing survival research again? Okay, so I will be doing a workshop at the Rhine in Durham, North Carolina, the afternoon of November 11th. So 8, 9, 10. Yeah, the 11th. That's a Saturday afternoon. I would actually be in Durham for a couple days at that point. We will be simulcasting, webcasting that as well. So if you are not a member of the Rhine Center or on the mailing list for the Rhine Center, which is just simply Rhine, R-H-I-N-E, you can see that right in the chat how it's spelled, rhine.org. There is a link for the mailing list. Get on that mailing list to learn about any events. They do a lot of web-based events. In fact, I did a lecture on poltergeist a couple weeks ago through the Rhine, and also our classes, which Tina is mentioning here. So, Paul, I think the survival class will probably be sometime in the winter quarter. That'll be probably when that's going to be offered. We haven't decided on the topic yet for my workshop on the 11th of November, but I'm sure it'll tie into survival in some way, shape, or form. All right, so for folks who might be interested, the Rhine Education Center, part of the Rhine Research Center, does offer classes, online classes. We just finished the last set of classes a couple weeks ago. Our next round of classes is going to start pretty much, I think it's starting, the first one will start on a Thursday night, Thursday, October 6th. Most of the classes are actually starting the second week of October. So my first class will be starting October 9th. And that is, I'm trying to remember which one is going to be which. I think that is my advanced field investigations. That's the one on Monday nights, October 9th. And on October 11th, a class that will probably be of more interest to everybody. I'll talk about the advanced class in a moment that I just mentioned. But I'm doing a class called Paranormal Case Studies. And for that class, I'll be going deeply, week by week, into a number of different cases, some very well-known cases within the field of parapsychology, including the Seaford poltergeist case. It's one that happened on Long Island in 1958. I'll be going into a reincarnation case that was investigated by Ian Stevenson, a few other cases that are kind of notable within our field. And then I'll be covering in depth a number of my investigations, cases from over the years as well. So that's Paranormal Case Studies, and that one's going to be on Wednesday night starting the 11th of October. You can take, for those unfamiliar, you can take classes just for fun, or you can take them for grade and credit towards a certificate, because we actually offer several different certificate programs. All right, the Advanced Field Investigations class does have prerequisites. And the prerequisite it's one of a few things. One, you have taken our field investigations class before. Two, you're already known to me as an investigator and you know what you're talking about, at least from the basic perspective. Three, I have a quiz. You can take a quiz to see if you can kind of opt out of the basic field investigations class. So again, you can contact me or just contact us through the Rhine Center. You can get to the Education Center directly from that page I mentioned, just rhine.org as well. So Melody's asking about the Developing Intuition class. I believe that's slated for the spring. Probably June is when that's going to be offered. It's either going to be May or June. I'm not quite sure which yet. So that's probably one that will be offered, one of those two, but not in the winter. We know that as well. Claire is saying reincarnation is fascinating. It is. Within our field, we focus and have focused, folks in our field doing work on reincarnation have focused on children who remember previous lives. And it's actually one of the things that Carl Sagan in one of his books noted was, even though he's an absolute skeptic about and even disbeliever around most psychic phenomena, it's one of a couple of things that he mentioned deserves significant research. Of course, that hasn't happened. So you have a child who's 2 to 3 years old who starts talking as if they used to be, and they'll talk about this. I used to be somebody else. My previous parents, my previous life. They will, in some instances, they'll have extensive factual information, which is absolutely, part of the investigation, make sure that's not known to the family. There's no connection between that child, the family, and the previous personality that's reported. And all of that is investigated very carefully in the field. And to have kids that some really, really, really good cases that Stevenson and others have done over the years that connect to past people who they could not have known about with really deep information and even recognition of the previous people from photographs and even in person. There's something going on there. So, and even one of my materialist friends who doesn't believe in survival at all, survival of consciousness at all, does not believe in reincarnation per se. He's fascinated by these cases because there's no other explanation for this. This is the thing. Let's put aside the paranormal explanation or the spiritual explanation. How is that possible? And this has been going on since before the internet happened. So before people could look up any sort of factual information. So it's something that really deserves to be looked at very carefully. Patrick is saying somebody said something about intro to parapsychology. Okay, yeah. So intro to parapsychology is being offered. I think Jimmy Aiken is with us. He's going to be teaching the class. Jimmy, if you want to pipe up and say if that's Thursday nights, if that's right with that. So I do recommend taking the intro course. You don't need to take the other courses, but if you're going to go forward with any of our certificate programs, you really should take that class. And it'll give you a really good idea about what the field covers quite well. All right, that is also listed already. So all the classes are listed on the Rhine Education Center site. And the links are in the YouTube page, in the description for the YouTube page, in fact. All right, Claire, you've seen some examples of children talking and remembering being someone else. It's really interesting. My mom was a preschool teacher, and she had one instance of a Japanese kid. Family came over from Japan. The guy was going to work at Sony locally in the area, and his kid, who barely spoke English, one day started speaking fluent English and talking about having been a businessman in Dayton, Ohio. So I put on some researchers onto that because I was in California at the time. My mom was in New York. But that was a pretty fascinating case that they were able to kind of connect to the real person. The kid had enough information about that. Children in these situations most often begin to forget this in their past life, if you want to call it that. They forget that by usually age 5 or 6. So it just kind of goes away. There's a few examples where they have continued to remember. Partly it's because of the emphasis on the connection with the previous with the personality's family. That happens quite a bit. But this is something that, parents should be aware of, that it's possible. And it's very different than, of course, with hypnotic regression, which is a thing we don't deal with at all. All right. What's your theory on what happens to us when we die? I don't have a specific theory. Some people, their consciousness seems to stick around here, like in the physical world. For whatever, there's many different reasons why, from a personal perspective, different reasons why. And there are likely environmental factors that allow those individuals, because not everybody sticks around as a ghost. In fact, it's a very small percentage of people who die who stick around more than a 24 or 48 hours as spirits, as ghosts. They move on. Now, if you want to go forward with that, there is some transition from the normal physical world to whatever the next step is. That's where mediums are connecting with spirits in that way. And there are descriptions that can only be described in terms of us living people can understand. But I do firmly believe that consciousness continues in some way, shape, or form after we die. But I certainly don't have all the answers. I won't until I die, and then I'm not in a hurry to get there. Okay. Paul, you're familiar with the book Death is an Altered State of Consciousness. I saw a blurb about that book, but I have not had a chance to check it out yet. Yeah, I did read something about that. And I also think, I believe that Annabella Cordoza, we were talking about EVP before, just wrote a book that came out from White Crow Books, I think on Konstantin Raudive and his work with EVP. So go to whitecrowbooks.com for that. Also, I should mention whitecrowbooks.com has several really good blogs by people in my field about survival of bodily death. So that's definitely something good to check out as well. But I'll check out that book, Paul. Thanks for the reminder as well. Okay. Talking nonstop. So hopefully folks will actually check out some of the classes. I know some people here who are here have taken some of the classes before. If you are concerned about the time involved, because that does come up, we do weekly live lectures, but those are recorded. I'd say that at least half of my students who register for class, sometimes it's 3/4 of the class, watches the recording. They don't actually attend live. We do have a little discussion session at the very end of the lecture for the folks who were there. Okay, Claire, you read Science. I know Marie Jones mentioned a meditation where she saw everything around her as light, everything is energy. Yeah, some people do in fact, go into meditative states, into altered states, and they perceive something, their perception shifts. So whether they're actually picking up energy and they're seeing it visually because it's perception. So just to highlight something here, what we see with our eyes is not necessarily what is actually the end result. So our eyes pick stuff up, our ears pick stuff up, and our brain processes the information. Just like a computer, like this camera, this Zoom camera, this webcam I've got, it's not an analog camera. I mean, it's a digital camera. It's converting the signal into digital impulses. It is converted into the computer as a visual input, visual image on a screen. Same thing what you're seeing, but it's not necessarily, it's a perception in that way. So our eyes pick stuff up. The optic nerve takes all those impulses and recreates in our heads. This is one indication of consciousness, by the way. We get an image that we can see, but that image may not have everything in it. In fact, we just remember we have a blind spot at the back of our retina where the optic nerve connects. And I don't know about you, but I have yet to see a black spot moving around when I move my eyes, because our brains fill in based on what it already has seen. It fills in that signal. Same thing with what you're listening to. So when somebody says that they see an aura, because there are people who claim to see auras, they may be perceiving or sensing the energy, the biofield, the electromagnetic energy, the heat energy being put off by the body, and it is perceived or ends up being seen, the perception of sight, as an energy field around a person, as a color. So there's no reason why that what she was talking about would not be true. And Jimmy, since you are here, you want to just mention the date, the night of the week your intro course is offered as well. All right. And Patrick is talking about, I'm glad you're looking forward to the intro class. We have actually 2 different field investigation certificate programs. One's a little bit more denser than the other. But, definitely take a look at what the descriptions are and what we actually have. The intro class is a really good entry point into any of our classes. Paul, do you have any new interviews coming up? I do. I'm doing I'm pre-recording an interview for a podcast called We Don't Die. I'm doing that on Tuesday afternoon, but I don't know when it's going to actually show up. And there's a couple of others that I've got on my schedule. So they'll be coming up. I'll try to put them on social media as time happens. Yeah, and Jimmy's right. So again, our classes, and by the way, folks who take the classes still have access to the classroom months later. So somebody, wants to go back over the audio or video of the class, they can definitely do it many months later. All the classes also include a lot of extra materials. Day is asking if the people who see auras, yeah, that's not the case. It wouldn't matter if they had an extra rods or cones in their eyes because there's nothing visual to see. It's unless the eye is sensitive, that part of the eye, the extra cones would have to be specifically sensitive to magnetic or the biofield around a person to be able to even pick it up. And there's no evidence for that at this point. This is it's either a different sense, a magnetic sense, electromagnetic sense, or it's a psychic sense, you might say. I mean, ESP itself works this way. When somebody gets a visual ghost or a visual of a haunting or a vision of something occurring like in remote viewing, that's a perception. That is not sensory. ESP is not a sense. ESP is not the sixth sense. Heavy on the word perception. In fact, it really should be called non-sensory perception, not ESP, not extrasensory, because it's extrasensory in the same way we talk about extraterrestrials. They're non-terrestrials. All right. Ghost Star, in light of Halloween being around the corner, do you have any new horror movies you recommend or we're looking forward to? I'm going to watch the Voyage of the Demeter, which just came out, the Dracula film, which takes place on the ship that carried Dracula from Europe to the UK to where he actually landed, and most of the story takes place there. But I'm not a big horror movie fan, especially today's horror films, mainly because they're often shock value and honestly, I just have a hard time with so many of the movies that are out there. I prefer science fiction, mysteries. The one movie I'm really looking forward to is The Seance in Venice, which is a Hercule Poirot movie. I think it's opening next week, in fact, which takes place with a murder at a seance. And that looks like, if you haven't seen the trailer, you should see the trailer on that. It looks really cool. Really looking forward to that one. All right. Okay, so anybody who wants to sign up for the Rhine classes, I'll just put the website in here. It's really easy to see the classes. It's rhineedu.org. Okay, very simple here. Paul, you're looking to the 50th anniversary of The Exorcist. I might watch The Exorcist again. When I first saw it, unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, I was in high school. I was with some of my friends, and they were quivering under their seats. And unfortunately, I was laughing, honestly. I thought the special effects were not very well done. So I didn't think it was a scary movie. And I had read the book, and I wasn't too impressed by that. So, okay. Jimmy, you're looking forward to Nandor Fodor and the Talking Mongoose. I am too. It's already out, but it's at like almost no theaters, and it's gotten really terrible reviews. Really, really, really bad reviews. But I'm looking forward to it. For those of you that don't know, let's see if I have the book handy here. I don't have it handy. There was a case of a supposed talking mongoose on the Isle of Man, north of the main British Isle, and it was investigated by Harry Price, probably the first person to really popularize the word ghost hunter, although it had been used many times before. For those of you who don't know, the word ghost hunter has been used as far back as the early 1800s. And the word ghost hunting goes back to the 1790s. So when I hear some of the ghost hunters on TV or people talking about the ghost hunters on TV, that this is a new term that nobody's used, that means they don't know history at all. Harry Price was the first big guy using the word ghost hunter, and then Hans Holzer popularized it in the 60s. Anyway, Jeff, that's spelled G-E-F, the talking mongoose, was investigated by Harry Price, and then Nandor Fodor, who's one of my favorite historical characters, investigated as well, and it was considered a fraud. There was just too much non-paranormal. It just didn't make any sense in so many different ways. There was thought to be a spirit speaking through the mongoose, or all sorts of things. But Simon Pegg, the comedian Simon Pegg, is playing Nandor Fodor, who is a Hungarian parapsychologist, analyst, psychoanalyst, really important to our field as well in many respects. Okay, it looks like the video has gotten better. Okay, but definitely, yeah, 1790s, Clara. There is if you go to, the website is, I think it's Brom Bones Books, brombonesbooks.com. Timothy Prasil, Prasil, who has written on folklore of all sorts. He's written some great books on Victorian ghost hunters and ghost hunters before the Victorian era, by the way, collecting historical accounts, as well as a book on collecting news accounts from the 1800s of ghost sightings. But he has a Ghost Hunter Hall of Fame. One of his blogs, he's the one who found the early 1800s use of the term ghost hunter. And then he just recently found the 1790s mentions of the phrase ghost hunting as well. So it goes back quite a ways. All right. Yes, Graveyard Grog, Brom Bones, aka Sleepy Hollow. That is correct. Yeah, so Brom Bones Books. I recommend his stuff all the time. And I follow him on Twitter and a bunch of other social media too. Okay, does anything paranormal scare you? Nope. Nothing in the paranormal scares me. However, let's put it this way. Living people carry guns and knives. Living people can physically hurt you. And I am leery when I've come to a couple of cases where I was a little put out, I guess, by what was going on with the people in the cases. So that's definitely been kind of scary. But yeah, the paranormal stuff doesn't scare me, especially after having been on site in a building that had a mass shootings in 1993, so in San Francisco. So it's not that. Now, I will say that I'm not very comfortable with spiders. So if there was a ghost of a spider, that might kind of freak me out. So yeah, and yes, that's right, Claire. Yeah, the living can scare the daylights out of you. We should not have to fear anything from spirits. Now, I will say that you could walk into a situation or live in a situation in a residual haunting where the event that gets recorded in the environment, the imprint, is of a terrible, terrible tragedy, murder, something really awful. And that might carry with it the fear, the emotion of fear of the victims who are in that situation, that you pick up and you feel that fear. So that's not your fear, but that is something you might experience. I've not experienced that. I have been in places where I have felt, well, you go to Alcatraz, for example, and you can't help but feel the sadness, despair, kind of like loneliness. All of that is absolutely like imprinted so hard there. And I've been in other places where I have felt something bad happened. Didn't scare me, but I know people who have been in places where they picked up on the physical event that got imprinted in the environment, which it didn't often have anything to do with death, and it freaked them out heavily. And I could see that because what they're experiencing was the fear of a person who was in that situation. That fear got imprinted. So that's kind of important. All right, Claire, some people think I'm a little weird because I love to sit in a graveyard to read a book or eat my lunch. Frankly, yeah, you're right. There is no place probably more peaceful than that. Um, cemeteries, even people when they go there to visit the graves of their relatives or others, they are quiet. They're respectful typically. So a gravesite, yeah, I mean, graveyard. But also, I want to say that contrary to popular belief, that's not where ghosts hang out. Not that there aren't a few um, isolated cemeteries where there might be a spirit wandering around. Most of the time, it has to do with emotion that's recorded there. But I want you to just think about this. And anybody says to you that who wants to go to a cemetery to investigate a ghost, number one, there better be some witnesses, mainly the caretaker. You need to talk to people there. But why would a ghost hang out? If you were dead, number one, you're not locked to your body. That's pretty clear. Why in the world would you stick around where your dead body is buried under the soil? I mean, unless you were looking for a real quiet place to read a book as a ghost, or just to hang out where there's nothing going on, that makes no sense. It literally makes no sense. So I do like going to cemeteries for historical purposes. So that's always an interesting thing. Paul used to work at a cemetery. You go to visit your relatives at a cemetery in Chicago. A few years ago, I think in 2019, I was doing a trip to New York and visiting my mom. And I grew up not far from Sleepy Hollow. So unfortunately, I couldn't get into the Dutch Church's cemetery graveyard, which is where Ichabod and Bram and Katrina are all buried. But there's a huge Sleepy Hollow cemetery, which is beautiful. It's a beautiful park-like environment. And the cool thing about it is the bridge that Ichabod supposedly ran across in Washington Irving's story to escape the Headless Horseman is still there. It's reconstructed, but and the Sawmill River is not very big, but that whole pathway, all of that's there. And actually, Washington Irving is buried in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. So I also spent time at Salem Cemetery when it's Salem, Massachusetts. It's really cool from a historical perspective. So let's see. Claire, the spirits are usually, if they're going to visit, it'll be with family and friends. That is correct. That is absolutely right. Yeah, people then do tend to avoid cemeteries, except for ghost hunters at night. And I remember my very first Parapsychological Association convention, which was in Syracuse University in Ithaca, New York. In Syracuse, New York, excuse me. There was a cemetery right next to the university. And one of our colleagues said, hey, at night, it was after dinner, let's all go to the cemetery and just kind of hang out and see if we experience anything. And yeah, we didn't. It was actually kind of cool being with a bunch of parapsychologists in the cemetery. The only thing we experienced was a couple of owls. So that was it. Not that any of us really expected anything else, but it was kind of one of those one-of-a-kind type events with your colleagues as well. So I would say to people, and the one thing I have to say is, not that I've been there, but I know I have a lot of friends who have, but if you go to Paris or Rome, there are the catacombs where the bones and skulls of hundreds of thousands of people, at least tens of thousands. So, when people ask me what's the most haunted, are places that have death, where people are cemeteries haunted, that would have to mean the entire city of Rome and the entire city of Paris is incredibly haunted because of the number of basically bodies that are underneath in the catacombs. And they're not. So the catacombs themselves are not typically haunted as well. So, that's, and people ask me about New York because I grew up in the New York area. It's like, well, yeah, you could it'd be hard to find any spot, square foot of New York, of Manhattan Island, where there hadn't been a death at some point in the last several hundred years. But New York is not generally haunted. I mean, there are places that have that, but it's not the case. Death does not connect to, does not necessarily mean there's going to be a ghost there. And hauntings which are recordings, those are recorded by the living. We leave impressions behind when we're alive, not when we're dead at all. All right, we're coming down. We've got about 4 minutes left to see if there's any last questions. Just a reminder, I will be back next Sunday night. Same bat time, same bat channel, hopefully without any video lag this time. And then we'll be 2 weeks after that. So it'll be the 17th, will be the next one, and then we'll continue 2 weeks through the end of October as well. All right. So just a couple last things, just a reminder, again, classes will be starting early October. I'll talk about them again next Sunday. So if you want one of those online classes from the Rhine Center, and I will kind of keep people apprised of that. Again, if anybody is here in the San Francisco Bay Area, I just kind of RSVP'd to speak at the USS Hornet again on October 27th. That's a Friday evening here. They're doing a Night of Spirits. And then I'll be speaking on the 14th in the middle of the day at a library setting, kind of a small theater setting in the East Bay here in outside of San Francisco again. Feel free. You can find my email address is actually in the description of this particular YouTube channel. You can see it in the chat if you kind of go back through the chat, but it's simply askprofparanormal@gmail.com. Easy to get to me here. All right, thanks everybody for joining us this time around. In the last 3 minutes, anybody have anything they want to add or ask a last minute question that's here about our topic? You can also ask me about other things as well. And I will be very happy to see you all next week. Just a reminder that, and I believe we have put this up on the description of the page as well, but there are a couple of links to documents you can download and some audio you can download as well. It is simply tinyurl.com/askprofparanormal and then askprofparanormal2. Those are places you can go. There are catacombs in New York City under St. Patrick's Old Cathedral. Yeah, there are catacombs in a lot of places. Thank you, producer Graveyard Grog, putting that up. My topics list. There's plenty of things you can download as well. There are also underground tunnels under a lot of towns in the West Coast, mostly created by, that's where sad part of our history, that's where the white folks put all the Chinese workers, is underground. So some really interesting history that is all around the world. There's a lot of underground in a lot of places. There's some really interesting stuff under New York as well. Okay, so thank you all for joining. And I will probably put up some more material. I'm just sorting through some of the stuff I have for folks to download for free. Maybe even a couple of ghost stories. I'll put a couple of things up there as well. And I'll do that before next Sunday. So we'll have a little bit more to talk about next week as well. But feel free to send me an email if you have a question in advance, or just come ready next time. That way we won't have any downtime. Okay. All right, everybody. So thank you very much for joining, and I wish you all a great week. Look forward to seeing you next week. And we're just coming down to the half hour, so I'll just say goodnight. And I hope you're all watching Ahsoka. I'm a Star Wars fan, and also watching Lower Decks, Star Trek fan. So if we ever want to talk about those, we can do that. All right, everybody. Take care. Good night.